In high school, I was accused of stealing fundraiser money meant for my sick little brother. Years later, during the week of my mother's funeral, the rumor went viral again, until I opened a folder I had been building for years and finally told the whole truth. I found out the rumor had come back the way you learn about most fires in a small town, not by smoke, but by a screen. My phone lit up on the kitchen counter while I was rinsing coffee cups. The slab of glass and metal buzzed, paused, then buzzed again. Group text, cousin thread, a Facebook notification from a group I had muted years ago, the kind with a nostalgic name and a mean streak hidden under mid-century recipes and photos of the high school marching band. You know you're from Brookfield if. I touched the screen with a damp finger, and there it was, again. A grainy screenshot of my senior portrait and, underneath, a tight sentence that was equal parts question and accusation. Is it true that she stole from her own brother's fundraiser? Posted by someone I used to sit next to in homeroom. It already had 97 comments, 2 hours old, and the line crept up while I stared. The funeral had been 3 days earlier. The folding chairs were still stacked in the garage. The flowers were still in the sink, drooping, the water faintly sour. Marissa texted me a screenshot of the same post before I could decide if I would look at it or throw my phone into the dishwater. She added a single dot, 6 of them actually, like a quiet, back away from the wedge kind of pause. I typed, stopped again. Then I opened the cloud folder I had named receipts on a night 2 years earlier when Jamie was asleep and I had realized I couldn't keep saying nothing forever. I put my coffee down. And this time, I decided I wasn't going to carry a rumor without carrying the truth with it. People remember the headline. They rarely remember the mess underneath. So here it is, the mess. The years tucked inside a sentence. How I became the girl who stole, and how the smallest voice in the room had the courage to say what the rest of us would not. Senior year smelled like pencil shavings and overripe bananas, the kind cafeteria workers could turn into muffins if they were feeling generous. Our hallways had that scuff soulshine by mid-October, and the bulletin boards spoke in 2 tones, bright flyers about college fairs and homecoming, then the handwritten notes about who to call when you needed a ride home from practice. I was 17 and tired in a way that painted the edges of everything, but I didn't know it yet. You don't know that particular fatigue while you're swimming in it. It feels like weather you don't question. My name is Nora. Officially, on the student council roster, it was Nora Bennett, treasurer. I hadn't asked for the title. Mrs. Doherty had handed it to me in the fall when she realized I was the one who could balance the books without getting distracted by the homecoming court drama. I kept a folded ledger in a binder covered with stickers I had peeled off a toothpaste sample box because I thought they looked like something a person with a plan would carry. The day before the fall carnival, I was in the main office labeling mason jars with blue painter's tape. Coins for care. A dumb name and a good cause. We had borrowed the name from a charity drive a town over. The blue tape stuck, then peeled up at the edges, then stuck again, wrinkled. It doesn't have to be perfect, Miss Sue said as she passed with a stack of hall passes. It just has to be held together. I smiled because that was the entire plan, not just for the jars. My little brother Jamie was 7 that year. He had eyes that crinkled into crescents when something made him laugh, and a way of whispering random facts like a personal game show only he was playing. He could tell you how many bones were in your hand, and also the names of every type of dinosaur except the ones that sounded like vegetables. Jamie had kidneys that didn't move toxins fast enough, which meant every other day he sat for hours under fluorescent lights at Riverview Regional, attached to a machine that hummed like steady breath. I learned to read those machines like people read faces. The green wave, the numbers that rose and fell. The alarm tone was a complicated song I could pick out instantly, even across the hall in the bathroom or down the corridor getting a paper cup of water. Our mother, Tracy, was a force you didn't stand too close to. She could whirl from tenderness to storm and back again in a conversation. The stories she told herself were always brave ones, about what she had carried, what she had had to do. In those stories, other people owed her a lot. Rent was a decision. Late fees were a conspiracy. She loved us the way a person loves something they don't entirely know what to do with. She loved us in a way that burned the air. She was the one who always had to explain why we needed money. At the hospital, she was fierce with nurses and calm with Jamie when they accessed his line, murmuring about after-school snacks and whether he'd want lime jello or cherry. At home, she smoked on the sidewalk and called Gary from her coat pocket, tilted against the wind. We weren't wealthy. That feels almost silly to say. We were the family that got quietly handed grocery gift cards by the PDA in case you need them, the family the nurse would mention to the woman in the waiting room who had said, "I wish there were something we could do." People did what people do when the problem is heavy and the people are close enough to be seen, but not so close they can see your counters. The carnival was a way to put all that somewhere. The school had planned it already. The rides rented from a company that had hats printed with their phone number. The dunk tank. The cotton candy machine in its plexiglass booth like a spaceship. We just attached our jars to it like a blue-tinged shadow. It was cold enough your breath fogged in little ghosts when the sun went down. The football field lights splashed the parking lot. I worked the bake sale table with Marissa, who had a way of telling a joke that curved at the end and put one hand over her mouth while she laughed. Caleb stacked the brownies in loose towers and then, immediately, tried to buy one even though he had just watched me budget exactly how many we needed to make it to 9 o'clock. "Wait until 9, I told him, and I'll give you 2 for 1. "This is extortion," he said, but he was smiling. I had the lockbox next to the jars, the kind you buy at an office supply store and feel ridiculous about until you see the way it makes people stop thinking about money like a tip jar and start thinking about it like a promise. I wrote everything down. I numbered the envelopes. I slid a sheet of paper under the jar table and noted bills versus coins with a chalky school pencil that left a smear on my fingers. At 9, the cheer squad co-captain's mom rolled up the cotton candy cords, and we wrapped the cords with those Velcro strips that cling to everything. We carried the jars into the school office. Ms. Sue unlocked the door and let us in, her key lanyard catching on her coat. I counted with Caleb while she filled in a receipt. $2,843. I wrote the numbers slow, like they were a language I didn't speak yet but needed to get exactly right. There were checks, too, made out to Brookfield High, Jamie Fund. I noted the names on each, even though I had no reason to. It felt like respect, to make sure each person existed in the story we were writing, in case we ever had to read it back to ourselves. "Take it home," Miss Sue said. "The bank's closed. Bring it to me in the morning and we'll deposit it into the school's activity account and cut a check to the hospital social worker." I nodded. The lockbox clicked when I closed it, a sound that felt final. I tucked it into my backpack, the one with frayed edge seams my mom said we would fix when we remembered. At home, the kitchen light pooled on our cracked laminate countertop and made the room look softer than it was. Our mother was on the phone by the front door, coat on, hair up in a messy clip, the kind of put together that means I might not be here long. She looked at my backpack the way you look at a person's gift when they walk into a party. "How did it go?" she asked. "We did good," I said. She smiled with one side of her mouth. "Let me take it," she said. "I'll put it on top of the fridge so you don't forget it in the morning." "I won't forget," I said. "I have to go to the hospital." Jamie's numbers were low. "I'm going to give you the keys to the car so you can meet me there." Our lives were a trade network. Money to time to transport to breath. We handed things back and forth and pretended it was all one thing. She chewed the inside of her cheek. "It's funny, the way you can remember the way your mother's teeth pressed into her own mouth." "Okay," she said. "Keys. But leave me the keys to the box. In case I need to look at something." "It's just money," I said, and then I heard the way that sounded. "I mean, it's counted. I'll take it in with Ms. Sue in the morning." She told me to. "You don't trust me," she said, not a question. "You're tired," I said. "We're all tired." A tired girl forgets things. A tired girl can look at her backpack. Jamie's squeaky sneakers, the ones with the blue stripes, were under the coffee table. I put them on my shoulder. I would carry them to him, because sometimes, and this is something I hadn't told anyone, what he needed to see was not me, but the shape of home walking into the hospital room. His shoes. His pillowcase. The world that would still be there after the machines. "I'm leaving," I said. My mother lifted a hand like a wave and turned back to the phone, her voice hushed in a way that immediately made me feel like I had done something wrong. At Riverview, the night nurse hung a bag and checked the line. The room smelled like lemon cleaner and a little like sweat. Jamie's hair was damp. He opened his eyes when the fluorescent ceiling hummed louder and smiled, the small, heavy kind of smile that makes an adult want to pretend they don't want to cry. "Your shoes," I said, and held them up like a prize. He laughed the tiniest laugh, the kind that registers in a kid's shoulders before it gets to their face. In the fold-out chair, I pulled the lockbox key from my pocket and felt its shape press into my palm until it felt like a small bruise. I didn't think I would need to defend a box. I didn't think I would have to choose between saying no to my mother and saying yes to a machine that wanted the pieces of my brother's blood it could keep. I fell asleep with my shoes on and the key pressed into my skin. The next morning, the light in our kitchen had a green tint, the kind that means it's colder than you think. The lockbox wasn't where I had left it. My backpack slumped against the chair. The table had a small slick circle where a glass had sweated in the night. I checked under the table, under the couch, in the cabinet where we kept the cereal and the onions side by side because they both needed dark and we had so little of it. "Mom?" I said. She came into the kitchen wearing last night's hoodie and a look like she was mid-sentence with someone else. "You're late," she said. "Where's the box?" She blinked, tipped her head. "What?" "The fundraiser. The lockbox." "Oh," she said, like the moment someone reminds you of a thing you said you would do and you are already forming a lie that feels like a plan. I took it. "It's fine. I deposited it already." "Before the bank opened?" I said, and immediately wished I had said, "Where, when, can I see the slip?" "They have a night drop," she said, as if I had asked about the existence of banks on our planet. "Nora, really? Do you have the receipt?" I didn't know I needed to be audited by my own child. "It's school money," I said. "I promised Ms. Sue I would bring the deposit in before first period." My mother sighed, exasperation running along the edges of her words like a careful border. I threw it away. "Do you want me to dig through the trash? Do you want me to leave half-eaten sandwiches on your clean counters?" "It's not about my counters." "What is it about?" I looked at the recycling bin and didn't look at the trash. I had 2 minutes before my ride. "Okay," I said, trying to gather calm like it was something you could hold in your hands and carry out the door. "I'll tell Miss Sue. We'll get a copy from the bank." My mother nodded, satisfied with the way she had turned that into a reasonable plan. "Exactly." But at school, under fluorescent lights and the feeling of a building exhaling because teenagers had arrived, Ms. Sue's face tightened. "No deposit's been made," she said after a call, her shoulder curved around the phone, her tone professional with a line pulled through it like a stitch. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure of what she told me," I said. "Let's try again after lunch," she said. Maybe there was a delay. At lunch, the bank said the same thing. No deposit. No pending. No envelope. Your mother might have slid through the metal flap like a promise. I went home after last period and put my hands in the trash with 3 paper towels as gloves. The bin smelled like coffee grounds and onions. I found a torn bank deposit envelope, the corner ripped with the sticker peeled back, and a receipt from Gary's Auto for $900, handwritten, the sort of carbon copy slip that makes a person look honest because of the blue smear. My mother stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Are you happy now?" she asked. "I just need the truth," I said. "Miss Sue needs it." "The truth is that people don't give because they love your brother," she said. "They give because I walk into rooms and make them look at him." I stared at her. "That's not true," I said. "You don't think I have earned any of this," she said. She lifted her chin. "The gas. The parking. The nights I don't sleep because some nurse wants to check a number. You think they're not giving because they like me?" "It wasn't given to you," I said, and felt the ground of the kitchen tilt, just barely. "It was given to him." She shook her head in a way that said we were speaking different languages. She turned and pulled the toaster cord out of the wall with a sharp little jerk. "This is so like you," she said. "You think you know what it's like to carry this all by yourself." I didn't think that. I knew I carried a piece. And I knew the lockbox was gone. That night at the hospital, Jamie watched a cartoon with the sound off. His eyes tracked the movement while the machine kept time for us. When I went to the bathroom, there was writing on the whiteboard, "Nora, call office," and the pen had left that faint squeak that feels like irritation. He tugged at my sleeve. "Mom says we're rich," he whispered, like it was a joke. I smoothed his hair. Mom says stuff, I said. He looked at me serious, the kind of serious that doesn't feel right on a kid face. Mom's friend took the gray box from the closet, he said, voice barely air. A gray box, I said, because I wasn't ready to say the word he had said. He nodded. He looked at me like he was waiting to see if I would lie to him. I swallowed. I couldn't make myself say it. Okay, I said. Okay. In Miss Sue's office the next morning, the fluorescent light hummed in a way that made me want to press my fingers in my ears. The door shut softly behind me. There was a second person in the room. Officer Keene, our school resource officer, sat in the extra chair by the file cabinet, his hands folded, his mouth set in a line that looked like neutral. We're having trouble finding the deposit, Miss Sue said gently. We thought maybe there was some confusion. I thought she did it, I said. My voice sounded thinner than I meant it to. Who did? He asked, mild. My mom, I said, and in that moment, it felt like waking up. The kind that isn't a gentle morning. The kind where the room goes from dark to bright too fast and your body jerks. He nodded like he had expected that. Can you bring her in? He asked. Can you come to my house? I asked, and then I realized what I had said. I imagined him standing in our chipped doorway with his polite voice, and my mother standing in front of him with her storm, and I saw the scene unfold in a way I didn't want. We don't need to escalate, Miss Sue said. We just need to understand. I wanted them to understand. I wanted, more than that, for Jamie to be able to get hooked up to a machine 3 times a week and not have the whole town think that his sister was stealing the paper cups right out of his hands. I called my mother from the hallway. She answered on the second ring. I am busy, she said before hello. They want to talk to you, I said. Tell them to talk to you, she said. You took it home. Mom. I will handle it, she said. After school, she was waiting in the kitchen, like she had been placed there by a stage manager. Here's how this works, she said. You tell them you misplaced the box. I'll make it right. We don't get the police involved. We don't get child services involved. They will take him. You understand me? I watched her mouth move. She was using all the words she knew would pin me against a wall. Take him. The 2 words that had kept me up more nights than the machine had. I felt my chest get tight. It felt like being underwater, the sound of your own breath too loud in your head. Sign this, she said. She had somehow, in the span of an afternoon, produced a typed document. A letter that sounded like me. It said things I would never say. I misplaced the cash. I accept responsibility. I will make the school whole. I will forego privileges until I do. There was a line for my signature and a place for my parents, because I was 17. She had signed her name next to mine in ink that hadn't fully dried. Her signature always looked like a string of small hills. This is not real, I said softly. We don't need real, she said. We need safe. I signed. I try not to think about that, but sometimes at night I still see my name tilt toward hers like a small animal leaning into the only heat it knows. It didn't take long. By Monday morning, there was a paper taped to my locker that said thief in a way that didn't look like a person's handwriting you could identify later. It was blocky, printed, careful. The kind of careful that loves itself. Someone had left Monopoly money folded under the lock, a joke made of paper, a joke that flittered to the floor when I pulled the door open and moved my books like a person who had stepped into a room and couldn't remember why. Caleb stood down the hall making himself look like he didn't see it. Then he saw me seeing it and his face changed. We'll get that, he said, meaning we, meaning me and the future where this wasn't true. It's okay, I said, lying, because I had learned to speak a language that kept the machine humming. At the hospital, a nurse pressed her lips together when she saw me, not in judgment, but in recognition. People talked. People connect dots even when they are not dots, even when they are just smudges on the paper. Did you take my money? Jamie asked, simple, no accusation in the word. Kids don't need the extra parts adults add when they're pretending to be kind. Hey, I said, and sat down on the edge of the bed. Who says that? Alex's mom, he said. In the hallway. She said some things. I looked at his hand, the way the tape crisscrossed. No, I said, and I let the words sit between us, not dressed in anything else, not made fancy or complicated. No, I didn't. Okay, he said, and he looked like he believed me because this was a room where lying would be like changing the channel on a machine that was monitoring your blood. The truth had weight here. It pulled a person into their chair. It made them sleep. It made them wake. I started paying the school in installments. $50 a month, then $55, because I got an extra shift at the diner. When I handed Ms. Sue the envelope every 4 weeks, she would look at me with her eyebrows tilted in a way that said she wanted out of the role she had to play. She wrote receipts. She kept them in a file. I asked for copies. I kept them in a folder between the math worksheets and the permission slip I had never turned in for a field trip I wouldn't have gone on anyway. After graduation, I didn't move away. I couldn't. Jamie had too many appointments and the bus from Maple Street to the hospital took too long, and none of the secondhand cars we could afford could be trusted to start when the temperature fell below 18 degrees. I worked mornings at a coffee shop on Hildebrand, afternoons at the diner on River Avenue, nights at a warehouse on the edge of town for a while until my back said no more. I enrolled in classes at the community college one semester and then stopped because my mind wouldn't sit. The textbooks got damp with kitchen air and curled like a letter held too close to a flame. I started a folder on my cracked laptop called Receipts because it felt like a joke and also because it felt like armor. I took pictures of the checks that came into our mailbox addressed to Jamie and then disappeared from the counter. I screenshot bank transactions that had my name typed next to withdrawals I didn't make. I saved the photo of the empty gray cash box that I found under my mother's bed, the lock pried open with a screwdriver in a way that made my chest ache with how obvious it was. My mother got better at taking small amounts and worse at hiding the big ones. She and Gary fought on our porch at 2 a.m, hiss-whisper fights that snapped into something louder when one of them realized the other wasn't going to say the thing they were trying to force their mouth to say. The breaking point arrived like a regular Tuesday and then knocked the wind out of us. We were late to dialysis. I had called from the diner and told my mother to wake Jamie up. She had said okay in a voice that sounded smooth. When I got home, the living room was too quiet. The blinds were tilted in the wrong direction, letting light slice through the room like a thing in the way. Jamie's lips were dry. His breath was shallow. The machine at the hospital beeped a song that I had hoped I wouldn't hear again. The nurse pressed her hand to his forehead and then called down the hall for a doctor with a tone that wasn't panic but wasn't calm. The social worker that day was a woman named Dana Morales. She had a small notebook and a pen that clicked with a sound that should have made me flinch but didn't. She sat in the family room with the chairs that looked like they were meant to be slept in and said, "Tell me everything you can." I told her a version of everything. Not everything, because everything is decades and 1,000 kitchen tables. But enough. I told her about the fundraiser and the envelope and the way my mother had said I misplaced it and I had signed something because I was 17 and terrified. I told her about the way the word take had rearranged my brain. I told her the specifics, because specifics are what keeps a person from rolling their eyes and saying that's not real. Dana wrote notes, then closed the notebook with a soft little click. "Do you feel safe?" she asked. "I feel responsible," I said. "Those aren't the same," she said. "No," I said. "They're not." She told me there were options. Temporary guardianship when the parent in charge of a medically complex child isn't showing up. There were forms, paperwork with boxes that fit on the lines if your handwriting was small. There were family services in town, underfunded and overstretched and human. There were legal aid clinics on Thursday nights in a building that used to be a pharmacy and still smelled faintly like lotion. I turned 18 that summer. We celebrated by having dinner at a place with summer heat in the chairs and a picture of a boat on the wall. My mother complained about the bill and also insisted that we get dessert. She cried in the car on the way home because a song on the radio had a line in it she loved, and then she yelled at me for making her cry. I filed the guardianship papers with the help of a lawyer named Jerome Patel from Maple County Legal Aid. He wore a suit that looked like it had been his father's and smiled like it hadn't occurred to him to do anything else with his face. He told me what we could ask for and what a judge might do. He taught me words I didn't know but had been feeling for years. Custody. Conservatorship. Medical decision-maker. He said the best interest of the child so many times the phrase lost its edges, and then got them back again. We got a temporary order. It was thin, a letter on court letterhead with a stamp that made it look official because ink had hit the paper in a deliberate way. It meant I could sign forms and argue with insurance and pick up medication samples from a nurse who had a Ziploc bag with Jamie's name on it, written in Sharpie. My mother didn't forgive me for it. She accused me of trying to steal her son, then accused me of not doing enough, then accused me of enjoying the attention. When I said that the attention was mostly bills and a thin praise that evaporated by the time you had walked home, she rolled her eyes and said, "You always think people are watching you." Dana set us up with a case manager who had too many families and too little time. He still showed up for the hearing in jeans because his car had broken down, then stood next to me like a person who would plant their feet if he needed to. Around Christmas, I got home from the coffee shop and found our mother sitting at the kitchen table with a glossy brochure for River Ridge Casino folded under her elbow, like it was a thing she was using to keep the table balanced. We moved through 2 more years like that. In and out of Riverview's sliding doors. Nights where the machine hummed and nights where it beeped and the alarm crawled under my skin. Days where I paid the school $50 in a white envelope and Miss Sue pressed her lips together without saying please stop. Once, I saw my mother standing in line at Gary's auto shop stuck between a woman buying wiper blades and a man joking about a muffler. She held herself like she was a person who thought a clerk should recognize her. Jamie got a kidney at 10, a gift from a stranger whose name we weren't allowed to know. The nurse told us about the transplant chain in a voice that had a kind of quiet respect in it I had rarely heard. Lior waited until after midnight for a surgeon flying in from 2 towns over. I squeezed his hand and ignored the way my mother cried out in the family room like the walls were applause. Marissa sat with me even though she had an exam the next morning. We watched the reflection of ourselves in the glass in that way where you stare at your own shape when you know you're going to remember a moment forever. He woke up with color in his face I hadn't realized could be there. The machine was gone. The room was the same room, but it was also a new planet. We lived in that after for a while. You think after means the end, but it doesn't. It means you move to a different chapter with the same characters, and some of them still haven't learned their lines. My mother died 4 years later, in her bowling league shoes, after she finished a second game at Pin City and leaned on the scoring console to laugh. The aneurysm ruptured without permission or warning. Or that's the story we were given, which is the only story available when a person's body does something quickly while they are mid-laugh. I got the call at my second job, in a back office that smelled like toner and the kind of carpet you could vacuum, and it still looked tired. The woman on the phone said my name, said hers, then said it again like she knew I might not be listening the first time. I drove to Halford and Sons, the funeral home with the clunky name that had a tin ceiling and a machine that printed programs crooked if you didn't watch it. The director asked about music. He had a chart with 3 columns: favorite songs, favorite colors, favorite charities. I wrote blue because it was the only color my mother had worn when she wasn't wearing black. I left the songs blank. I lied and wrote the charity as the hospital. Maybe it would make me feel like the story made a circle. That night, after I rinsed the coffee urn and put it on a towel to dry, my phone chimed and buzzed like it had something to announce. The rumor had been sleeping, and then a woman with a new eyebrow shape and a living room with very white couch cushions poked it with a stick. Anyone else remember when Nora B. stole from her own brother's fundraiser? Asking because I heard she's back in town. In the comments, a guy named Ty with a yard sign business posted a 40-second clip. "Okay, Brookfield, story time," he said with a serious voice he probably practiced in his car. "There was this girl, and she was like the treasurer, and her brother was sick, and there was this box of money, and then it went missing." Like, who does that? I mean, allegedly. He said allegedly like it would save him from being wrong. He said it like a charm you tuck under your tongue. Marissa texted the screenshot with the dots. I stood at the sink. I smoothed my hand over the stack of paper programs we hadn't handed out because we ran out of people. I breathed until the edges of the room stopped vibrating and I could hear one sound at a time instead of all the sounds at once. I opened the folder. Receipts. I had built it in the quiet hours between the machine and the bills, between the envelope from the school and the check that had my name forged on it like a costume. It wasn't a grand plan. It was stubbornness and the fear that truth was being pulled out like threads, and if I didn't grab them, the whole thing would unravel until there wasn't even a scrap of fabric to hold up and say this is what it was. The first file was a photo of the letter I signed when I was 17, my name leaning toward my mother's like a girl leaning toward the only heat available. The second was a PDF with the bank statement that had my name typed next to a withdrawal from the hospital social workers fund, a transfer that landed in an account my mother controlled. The third was the scan of a check with her signature under my printed name, the loops too high on the R and the T, the little irony of writing a child's future in ink you bought next to scratch off tickets. There was the photo of the gray cash box with the lock pried out like a tooth. There was the voicemail I had saved the day she forgot to hang up and talked about that money from school, like it had been air. There was the note I had written on a bar napkin at the diner when Gary said a sentence about settling up in a voice that understood only one verb. I redacted the account numbers with the practice of a person who has watched other people's data get eaten alive on the internet. I attached a letter at the top of the folder that said, in words I had practiced, "This is not to speak ill of a person who can't defend herself. This is to protect a person who shouldn't have to defend himself at all." I sent it to Miss Sue, and to the school board email address that had at least one person behind it whose job it was to look at the things people sent and decide if they mattered. I sent it to Ty, the guy with the serious voice, with a line that said, "If you're going to tell a story, tell it right." I posted it in the comments under the rumors and in a separate post on my own page, because I didn't want to let the story live only in the place where people go to forget they know each other. Marissa called me, even though she doesn't like the phone. "You sure?" she asked. "I am," I said, and my voice didn't shake because it had been shaking silently for 17 years, and I had run out of tremor. "Okay," she said. "Then breathe. And if you need me to read comments, I'll do it, and you can make cookies with Jamie or sleep, or stare at a wall and let your pulse come back." "Thank you," I said. The words felt like water. "Also," she said, and her voice softened in the way it does when she is going to say something that will make me want to lie down on the floor and let the carpet carry me, "proud of you." By morning, Brookfield had done what small towns do when you remind them they have faces attached to names. The comments slowed, then shifted. Ms. Sue posted a statement under the school's page, simple, precise. "We have received documentation that clarifies the events of 20. We are grateful to Nora for her stewardship of funds and apologize for any earlier statements that implied otherwise." Some people wrote apology paragraphs that tried too hard, like extra credit in a class that had already ended. Some wrote short, like they were trying to make humility move faster. A man I hadn't thought about since he spilled orange soda on my shoes in 9th grade wrote, "Damn, I thought I knew. Sorry, Nora." Jade, the one who had posted the original question, wrote, "I shouldn't have asked like that. Then I shouldn't have asked at all." A few people kept their corner sharp. "We don't speak ill of the dead," one wrote. "We don't speak ill," I wrote back, and then deleted it and typed, "Sometimes telling the truth means we finally stop pretending the lies didn't hurt anybody." Then I deleted that, too, and wrote nothing because I didn't need to teach anyone a lesson who did not want to learn. The school board asked me to meet. The conference room was bland enough to make you talk. The chairs rolled in a way that made you feel like you weren't allowed to sit still. A woman named Paula, who I knew by sight from elementary school pickup lines and from a small-town bake sale 30 years earlier in a photograph with her hair feathered, sat at the head of the table with a yellow legal pad turned sideways. "We should have done more at the time," she said. "That doesn't help." "I know." I nodded. I kept my mouth closed because the list of things that didn't help could circle the block. "We will refund the payments you were forced to make," she added. "We'll issue a letter for your file." "What file?" I asked, and then realized that institutions store moments like weather. A record exists somewhere, even if it is a paragraph in a file that has been moved to a plastic bin in a closet in a building that used to be a bus depot. "Your student file," she said. "We can attach the letter." "What am I supposed to do with a letter in a file?" I asked, and I cared and I didn't care in perfect halves. She looked at me like she had thought I would want it. "We can post the letter publicly if you prefer." "Just stop telling the wrong story," I said. "And if someone is counting money for a sick kid, don't make a 17-year-old take it home." On the way out, the district's attorney handed me a check. It was heavier than I thought it would be, not literally, but in the way your eyes read your hand. I didn't want the money in my hand. I wanted it to be in the future somewhere, already doing something useful. At lunch in Marissa's car, because the diner felt like a room where money meant tips, and the way I held the check in that space would be a story somebody would tell later. I put the check in an envelope that said James Bennett Special Needs Trust in black ink with my handwriting controlling itself. Aunt Lee, my mother's sister, called me the next day. She had a voice like brittle ice. "You think you can make a fool of your mother?" she asked. I could hear the cigarette smoldering in the pause and the way her lips drew together when she inhaled. "You think this is love?" "I think he deserves a life that isn't paying for other people's mistakes," I said, and I sounded calmer than my hands felt. She told me she had talked to a lawyer. She said the word estate like it applied to something we should touch gently. She said she would seek to be named administrator because I was clearly unstable. I let her talk until she ran out of air, then I told her I had already filed. The probate clerk had stamped my petition with a smile because, she said, she liked my neat handwriting. At the hearing, Aunt Lee showed up in a suit that didn't fit and a clutch purse that looked too small for anything except performance. She waved a copy of a Facebook comment like it was evidence in a case that hadn't started yet, which is to say she made the thing she wanted to be true, the thing she wanted the judge to see. Jerome sat next to me, tie slightly crooked, his legal pad turned to a page covered in notes he probably didn't need because he had already made himself remember them. The judge read the letters. He read the school's note. He read the documentation from the bank that showed the donation money go from the school to the hospital to my mother's hands. He looked up at Aunt Lee with a face that said he had done this before. He said, "Miss Bennett has shown care and responsibility for her sibling." "Miss Hart," he said to my aunt, choosing the court's habit of last names like he was deliberately making the players interchangeable, "your concerns are noted." When the gavel hit the block, it didn't sound the way it does on TV. It sounded like a heavily used wooden spoon hitting a countertop. It sounded small, human. The funeral smelled like ham and coffee. We held it in the big room at Halford's because the smaller one felt like putting people into a scene that would make them whisper. Gary showed up in a jacket that looked borrowed and eyes that didn't know where to land. I stood by the guest book so I could see each name. That was the part that made me feel like the world had an order, however strange, that people came into a room and admitted they had been there. A woman I had never met hugged me too long and told me a story about my mother cutting a line at the pharmacy. I said thank you for coming because the play we were in had a script and this was my line. After the service, in the quieter place where the back hallway meets the office, Miss Doherty found me. She took my hands in the way an older woman takes your hands when she wants to revert to every soft script she has ever learned and still tell you the real thing. "I knew," she said. "I mean, I didn't know, but I guessed. I am sorry I didn't do more." I looked at her. I wanted to say you were my favorite teacher, and I wanted to say you wrote me a scholarship recommendation that I couldn't use because I didn't go, and I wanted to say you told me once I was good with numbers, and I am still figuring out how to live with that. Instead, I said, it's okay, and we both knew it wasn't, and that sometimes the play asks you to say a line anyway. After everyone left and the room had that flat echo of chairs without people in them, I went back to our apartment to start the grim catalog of sorting a life. In the bedroom closet, behind a stack of hanging shirts that still held the shape of the body that had been in them, under a laundry basket with one broken handle, there was the gray cash box, a snarl of metal where the lock used to be. In it were 2 receipts and the rubber band from a stack of money that no longer existed. There was also a note. My mother's handwriting. On a receipt from the casino. "Oh, Jay, $800, I'll fix it." I sat on the floor with the box in my lap, letting the cold of the metal climb through my jeans. I don't know how long I sat there. When I stood, my legs were shaky and the room looked different, like the stranger who had been standing in it had left. Jamie found me in the doorway. He was 14 and taller than me, with a face that had learned not to grin the way it wanted to in case the world decided to read it wrong. He looked at the box and then at my face. "We're okay," I said. "Were we ever?" he asked, but not like a challenge. Like a serious question. "Yes," I said. "Yes." Here and there. The kind of okay you have to look for. We drove to the river that night, This old trick of a town without a lot of money to spend. The water was a black ribbon. The boardwalk's LEDs were new and too bright, the kind that made the old guys at the bait shop grumble. Jamie snuck a piece of chalk from a kid who had left his bag on a bench and wrote on the board painted for that purpose, "I got a kidney. Thank you." He left the last words small at the bottom, where people would read them if they went looking. He stepped back, and he and I stared at the chalk until it was part of the wood. Merge the rumor with the sound of water against pilings, and you get something that almost feels like permission. Years soften things. They also sharpen them. Depends where you stand, how you tilt your head, if the light is doing that trick where it flattens the faces of buildings and makes everybody look like they belong to the same painting. Jamie is 16 now. He wears hoodies even when it's hot and draws comics that are all reluctant heroes and machines that make the sound a heart makes if you press your ear to a chest in a quiet room. He eats too many cereal bars and then scrunches up the wrappers and stacks them on his desk like he is making tiny shiny sculptures and doesn't know it yet. We live on Linden Street, in a 2-bedroom with thin walls and a landlord who will replace the cabinet door if you knock on his door and remind him 3 times. The kitchen window looks at a maple tree and at a piece of sky that is sometimes a color I can't name without sounding like I am making it up. I work days at Riverview as a unit secretary. I wear scrubs, which feel like pajamas, which means my body is always surprised when I sit down on a couch at home because some part of me thinks I am still at work. Marissa is still the person I call when the world feels like it is misplacing its own edges. She is not my girlfriend. People keep implying. It doesn't matter what she is. She is steady. She comes over with pierogies and tells me about a case she is working on at the public defender's office in a way that doesn't break any rules. And we do a puzzle with pieces that are all sky, and we look at each other when we get the corner wrong and both laugh in a way that loosens something in my chest. At the 10-year reunion, they taped our senior portraits to the walls of the gym like there was a chance we might not recognize the people we had once been. I stood under mine for a minute, long enough to feel ridiculous, then went to the bleachers and let the bass from the rented speakers move my bones a little. Jade came up to me with a plastic cup and a posture that had softened. She said, I was an ass. She said, I thought I was being funny. I said, I know. Neither of us said, I forgive you. Neither of us said, I don't. Ty, the yard sign guy, was there too. He raised his cup. You were right, he said. He said it like he had tried out other ways of saying it and decided this was the least likely to make me want to walk away. Thank you, I said. There are still days where the rumor shows up like an old relative who doesn't know how long to stay. A commenter on some post will make a joke about cash boxes. Someone will say, watch your wallet, when I walk into a room like they are original. Most days, it's quiet. Most days, the story I tell about myself and the story people tell about me are at least in the same book. I keep the folder. Receipts. I add to it sometimes, not because I need to keep proving a thing that has been proven, but because it reminds me that the truth is made of small pieces that we collect and keep in order so we can take them out when the world starts fraying and say, see, here, look, remember. Once in a while, I take the gray cash box out of the closet and hold it. It's empty. It will stay that way. I tell myself that emptiness is sometimes the best you can do for an object. That an empty box can be proof of a boundary successfully held. Our mother's grave has a flat marker with her name and 2 dates and no dash, because dashes are made of what we put between them, and it felt wrong to carve it into the ground. I go sometimes. Not often. I don't stand there to bring flowers or to say anything into the air. I stand there because a person sometimes needs to look at a line of trees and a stretch of sky and a piece of metal with a name and remember that a life can be both very long and very short at the same time. And that you can love a person and still not hand them a key to a box. When money came in from the school, the check heavier in my eyes than it was in my hand, I put it into the trust we had set up for Jamie. We had a lawyer at Family Services who loved paperwork like it was a sport, and he made sure the trust was mundane and durable. People think dramatic fixes are what healing looks like. Healing looks like a man in a tie with coffee on it saying, okay, now we'll sign this, and then we'll get the notary, and then you can go home. Sometimes we sit on the couch and watch movies from the year I graduated. They're bad in a comforting way. Jamie falls asleep with his feet on my lap and his breath steady, and nothing anywhere beeping. The room smells like microwave popcorn and the maple tree through the window. When I stand up, I do it slowly. When I turn off the lamp, I don't expect anything to change. That is what hope looks like on a Wednesday. Not a speech. A lamp turning off and the room staying kind. You can love your family and still build a fence. I didn't know that when I was 17. If you had asked me then, I would have said loving someone meant holding their hand and then letting it drag you into a river you could not swim in. Love, I have learned, is sometimes the person at the door holding out a towel and saying, "You can come inside," when you're not carrying gasoline. I learned that the smallest voice often sees the most. Jamie told the truth in a whisper because he did not know yet how to lie to protect the adults in the room. I thought my job was to be brave in silence. It wasn't. It was to be brave in my saying. I learned that receipts are mercy. They keep stories from becoming the kind of myth that chews on bones and calls itself dinner. They anchor us. They remind us that when someone says you did a thing you did not do, you can pick up a piece of paper and say, "No, here's the path where the money went. Here's the signature. Here's the way we learn the edges of our names so we could make them our own again." I learned that consequences are not vengeance. They are the edges of a field that tell you where you are still by the road. I learned that grief and relief can sit in the same chair and touch elbows, and that there is no etiquette for what you should do when that happens. You drink some water. You take a nap. You let your mouth form the shape of the words you need, and you say them to a person who will set them down gently and not try to make them into a lesson. And I learned that hope doesn't always feel like a sunrise. Sometimes it feels like a Tuesday in a kitchen with a slightly sticky floor, and your little brother says something nerdy about a prehistoric fish, and you roll your eyes and tell him he's stuck with you, and he says good, and you believe him. Author's note: if you're dealing with complicated family dynamics, illness, or financial manipulation, you're not alone. Fictional but plausible resources to consider: Maple County Legal Aid, Sliding Scale Civil Legal Help, Riverview Family Services, Caregiver Support and Case Management, Brookfield Bereavement Network, Free Grief Groups for all ages, and Midwest Kidney Support Line, peer mentors for families navigating dialysis or transplant. If stories like this help you feel less alone, consider following and sharing it with someone who might need it.